All right, today we are going to work on editing apartment images in Lightroom, and we might hit some Photoshop as well. Um, if I pull up this bottom bar here, you might be able to see all my tabs, and the way I did that was just by taking the mouse, because I have two monitors, so there's a monitor down below. So I just went to the area where the monitor is not at from below and pulled the mouse down until these popped up. I'm gonna put them back down at the bottom. You don't need to see those. And we're on the desktop here, so we're gonna go to Media Projects and Apartments. And the apartment that we are working on now, this was Canopy, and I just finished these. You can see here it says Canopy. Here's the signage, it says Canopy. The next one that I want to work on is the Logan, because this is the order that I shot them in. So if I double click on this Logan folder, you can see I've already separated everything into images and videos. So all my video files are in here and all my images are in here. So we want to open these up in Lightroom. We're currently in the library tab. There's also a develop module. There's a map module, and these other ones we don't use very much. Zoom out a little bit. We don't use these, the book, slideshow, print, or web, or this little cloud-based guy here. We're just worried about these first three modules. So I'm going to go back into library. I'm going to come down to the bottom left and hit import. And then it's going to say, please select the source. Now, since I've already separated these, I can just drag the images file over into here and it will open all my images. But I want to show you what happens if you have mixed images and videos. So I'm going to grab the entire Logan folder here and just drag that in. Now, if I had just dragged the images folder in itself, it would have just brought the images over. But as you can see, we have video files here. What do we do with all these video files? We don't want to open them in Lightroom. I could go through and click each one of these to turn them off. I could highlight that and come down here and highlight that and turn all of those off. That's not too bad. But sometimes they're all mixed up in here and you can't go through. You'd have to click each video file individually to pick them out that way because they're not already separated. So there's a little trick, and it is on the Mac, called the Option key. If we push the Option key, you'll see down here at the bottom, we have the option to check or uncheck videos. I want to push the Option key, click uncheck videos, and it turns them all off no matter where they are in the mix. Of course, the easiest way is to separate them ahead of time, as I've done here. But if you happen to get a video or two that snuck in on you, then that's the easy way to go through and close them. So I'm going to import these images. Now I have two different types of images here. I have images that were taken with the drone, and I have images that were taken with the camera. I'm using a mirrorless Nikon Z6 II in this instance to take these pictures. Maybe Z7 II. Maybe I'm using the Z7. Either way, doesn't matter. These are taken with the drone and they're all individual images. And these are taken with the camera, and these are all bracketed images, which means there are three of each image. Let me get over here to where the images start. Pull up my develop module so you can see. So here we have the fitness center, and there's actually 6 of that one, but 1, 2, 3. So I have one that's properly exposed, one that's severely underexposed, and one that's overexposed. So we come over here, 1, 2, 3. It looks like I may have missed focus on that one. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. And we're going to have to blend all of these images together to get all of the highlight detail and all of the shadow detail. So here you can see the highlights are not overexposed, but in this one the highlights are severely overexposed but the shadows are not underexposed. And here is our proper exposure. So between the three, we can have the computer sort of mash all of these together and combine them into one image. So we're going to go through how to do that, but step by step. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab all of my drone images. And that's these here. Actually, this is a drone image and this is a drone image also. And the reason I know that is because it's already got the little marker down here that looks like a bubble with a line on it or a lollipop. This is actually the map icon to let you know that this has maps on it. The drone has GPS built in, so the map is already added. We'll talk about that in a second. The first thing I need to do with these images that are chosen, though, is that the drone takes pictures on a different aspect ratio than the camera does. So I don't know if you can really tell between these two. Maybe if I zoom in on this one and go back and forth, you can see that this image is a little bit taller this way than this image is. This image is a proper 3x2. This one is like 4x5, which is not what we want. We want all of them to match the 3x2. So I'm going to grab all of my drone images. I'm going to see this sync button right here. I'm going to go right next to it. There's a little black and white button there. I like to call it Super Sync, but it's actually called Auto Sync. So if I click on that, you'll see this changes from sync to auto sync. That means that all of these images are going to get whatever changes we make right here. So I'm going to come up to the top of my right hand bar over here. Just below this is called the histogram. I'm going to click on the crop overlay, and that's going to show me my crop options. It's currently in its original crop, but I'm going to click on the original and come down to where it says 2x3, and you'll see these grayed out lines. This is where our new crop is going to be. And it also said, I don't know if you saw that, but it said crop set for 22 images. So all those images are being cropped at once. All right, so they are now the same aspect ratio as all of these others, but don't forget to go in and turn off the auto sync, or else every change that you make from here on out is going to affect every other image. So I'm going to jump back over to this first image, and what I like to do is go through, I'm going to hit Command A to choose all my images. I like to go through and make sure that all of my verticals, that's the lines that go up and down, are properly straight. And I do that by clicking this vertical button right here. There wasn't much change in that one. This is a big drone shot, probably not going to change much there, but on a building, the computer can see where all of these lines are that are going straight up and down. If I hit vertical, it straightens everything out just a little bit. It's not always exact, so I like to drop down here to this bar where it brings up the grid lines and just look and say, yeah, those look pretty straight. If not, I could adjust them a little bit more this way or this way by hand. If you make that adjustment, you need to make sure you click on Constrain Crop, or else anything that gets moved out of the frame will show up as white, and you don't want those white borders. You want everything to be square. All right, so let's start at the beginning. Vertical. I'll hit vertical on this also because we cropped this in the center. I don't need this much sky in the image, so for this particular one, I'm going to hit the crop again, and I'm going to pull the crop all the way down to the bottom so that we have more ground than sky. We already hit vertical on that one. This one probably won't vert properly because it's a straight down shot and there are really no straight lines in here. You can try it. It did pretty good on that one, probably because the building is in here, but not really a significant difference. And it kind of makes the bottom portion feel like it's closer to us than the top portion is. I don't want that. I just want it to be straight down. So I'm going to leave it as it was shot. This one might be interesting. Yeah, that pulled in really nice. So everything's nice and straight. It's seeing all these straight lines in the back here. And I'm just going to go through all of the images and make sure that everything is vertical. I didn't like how that one did because it pulled everything too far to the right. So if I bring up those grid lines, you can see, especially in this area, these lines are straight, but they're not straight up and down. It's further away from the grid line on the top than it is on the bottom. And even over here, part of the reason for that might be because it's pulling its verticals from these pillars. The posts are almost never perfectly straight, and also gutters that come off of the building, they end up not ever being perfectly straight. So what we can do in this case, this one just looks like it's rotated backwards, like to the right a little bit. So I can grab this rotate slider and bring it back until everything lines up with those grid lines. So I'm looking especially at this area here, these edges of the building, and that looks pretty straight to me. If it was still a little bit off, I could grab this vertical slider and adjust it up or down that way. And if that didn't work for me, then I would grab guided and I would create guided lines. We'll talk about that more later. And again, I want to make sure I hit constrain crop, since I changed all of that. If anything got out of frame, constrain crop would fix that. All right, vertical. Feel like that's just a little bit off there. Constrain crop, good. Vertical. Now this one's interesting because it's a straight on shot. So not only do your vertical lines need to be straight, but your horizontal lines need to be straight also. So if maybe we don't have a lot to go on here, but if like this line was not perfectly straight across with the grid lines, then we could grab the horizontal slider and we could fix it going back and forth this way. We'll talk more about that later. Did you see how that popped in when I hit that constrained crop? That's what I'm talking about if you end up with some white space somewhere around the border. Hit vertical, and I want to do this for all of my images. So I'm going to go through and make sure, make sure all of my images are vertical. And again, we've got too much sky. Whoops. So I'm going to grab my crop, drop it to the bottom, hit enter, go through and make sure everything is vertical. This is one of the most important steps in architectural photography, is making sure that your verticals are perfectly straight. Now that's interesting. I've got two shots of this room, and one is very underexposed. Oh, I know why. We're not going to do that yet. We're not going to go through all of those and hit vertical on these yet. We still have to process these so that, how many did I do? I did two. We need to process these so that these are single images, not bracketed images. So we'll do that in a second. But the next step I want to do after making sure that things are vertical is I want to make sure that everything has this little map icon on it here. So if I go up to maps, you can see there are a bunch of little yellow markers on here. That's for each of these drone images, and you can see them kind of light up as I hover over them where they are on the map. I see a little guy bouncing up and down there. That's where the drone was when I took the photo. For the rest of these images that the camera took that doesn't have GPS on it, I'm going to grab the first camera frame, hit shift, hold it down, and click on the last camera frame. And that's just going to highlight all of my camera images. And you see that all of these went to a dark orange instead of a yellow. Now, we took all of these pictures in this apartment complex. The apartment complex is centered around the pool. So I'm just going to grab and drag all of my images up to where that icon is and drop that down. And it went from 5 to 26. So it took all of those images and they now have map markers at the bottom here. The only other thing to check is that all 44 images are in the same place. So if I zoom way out, it goes to 44. Sometimes the GPS on the drone will give you some random out in the middle of the ocean near Africa spot, and you have to grab that one and pull it back into place. But other than that, that's how you set your map settings. All of our GPS coordinates are now set for there. So we can go back into the develop module. Whew, that's a lot to go through already, but we want to talk about how to deal with these bracketed images. So the next thing I want to do is I want to stack all of these bracketed images, the ones that are from properly exposed to underexposed and overexposed, so that we can turn these all into one image. And the way I do this is through stacking. So if I go all the way up to the top of my screen, it's over here. You can't really, oh wait, no, I can do it right on screen here. I can come back over, right click, and go down to where it says stacking. Now if I just hit group into stack, it's going to stack all of those images into one image. We don't want that. We just want the three that were taken at the same time to be auto stacked together. So I'm going to come down here, I'm going to click auto stack by capture time, and you'll see I have it set around 10 seconds here. It says it's going to make 8 stacks out of all of these images, and that there are going to be 21 that are unstacked. Well, we have 23 pictures here that were taken with the drone, and those are all single pictures. So it's probably not a large enough space. I have 10 seconds between images. If I take it down to 9, now I have 23 unstacked. That's all the drone images, and 7 stacks. So it was trying to stack those two images together because they were taken so close together in time. But generally 9 or 10 seconds. I don't take images that are any closer together than that. So I'm going to go ahead and create a stack. And as we go through, you'll see that all of these images are now stacked in 3s. Sometimes it might stack a couple of images in 6 instead of 3. So if you see that, you need to... My wife is calling me. What? I hear you. You're in the middle of my video. Now you're on video too. Do you want to come say hi? Okay. So if I grabbed this image and it had a 6 on it, then I could come to stacking and I could choose to unstack it and just restack those individually. So to do that, I would have to make sure that I'm on whichever image was stacked, and then right click it, go to stacking, and then unstack. And it would unstack those 3 images. And then I could go back, but it would be 6 images if it was too many in one place. So then I could just grab the 3 that need to be together, stack those individually, group into stack, and then they would all be together. So what that does is it tells the computer that each of these need to be set into an HDR process. And the HDR process can also be found by right-clicking. And we're going to go to Photo Merge and HDR. Now it says 7 merge operations are in progress. So it's going to take each of these 7 photos and it's going to stack them into an individual photo. And you'll have a 4 here instead of a 3 once that's done. So it's currently working on that. It says 7 operations in progress. Let that go through. Boom, that one just changed to a 4 from a 3. So this takes a few minutes depending on the speed of your computer, but we can go look at that image that has been stacked already, and you can see that all of the highlight detail and all of the shadow detail, we're able to see some, real detail over here in the shadows, like all of this, but also where it was really bright, we can still see like grain in the white walls and things like that. So that is what an HDR image enables us to do, is to be able to make up all of the shadows and all of the highlights. And if you remember, when I was clicking through, because these two are taken in the same place, one of them was super bright and one of them was super underexposed. But once the computer puts all three of them together, you can see, in fact, I think somebody was walking through the door here on this one. So I decided to take the shot again so that that door would be closed and there wouldn't be anybody in the frame. And that's the reason why I have two of those. This one's stacked already and it's pretty yellow. That's why I have this white card down here. We'll talk about that later. And we've got 4 operations left in progress and now 3. So those are going pretty quick. And I could probably go through and start working on these while those operations are running because it's going to take us a little bit. But I wouldn't be surprised if we get kicked out because one of the operations ends or something to that effect. So let's just take a look. We already went through and made these vertical. The next thing I like to do, particularly for exteriors, but pretty much for every image, is I'm going to click auto and see what that gives me. And it kind of changed our skyline. If I hit my back slash key, you can see where it started and where it is now. It brought a lot of colors in around the trees and kind of deepened everything. But you can see over here in our histogram, we have too much in the shadows, so our black point is too dark, and this little pyramid at the top, little triangles at the top, we have too much in the highlights. So if I clicked on that highlight, then the highlights would show up in red. This one's not showing us a lot. It's like hard to see with all of the detail in here, but this one is also clicked. You can see the shadows come up in blue. So look down here at where these plants are. If I unclick and click, you can see that's where that kind of shows up. So if I grab the histogram area where the highlights and the shadows are, and I just sort of compress these together, you can see that little pyramid went away. And watch this blue down here. As soon as that pyramid goes away, all that blue goes away also. So that gives us the correct black point, the correct white point. There's some buzzards or something over here on the sidewalk. That's kind of weird. And we'll get rid of those. And then I just have to worry about like my shadow detail and my exposure. I like to bring my exposure right up to around the top of the key of the midtones. Once you do that, you have to watch these highlights. They're going to creep up again. And as a last resort, you can come down here and you can tweak highlights with this slider, or you can pull out shadows with this slider. I want to pull that up just a little bit. You can see all that detail coming into here. And I think that looks pretty good. I would say we're done with that one. I'm going to hit Command A to choose all. All of our HDR images are finished processing. All of these have 4s on them now. So we'll see those later in the video. Same thing here. We're going to click auto. I'm going to just pull down that blue point a little bit, pull that shadow detail out, compress everything together, bring up my exposure with the midtones, and then for something like this, because it was kind of a hazy day and everything has kind of like a white frost over it, I might grab this dehaze slider and just bring some detail back into those buildings. Some contrast. See how that gets more contrasty? But also watch what it does to the sky here. I'm going to go full bore and that sky just gets really cranked, which we don't want that because when we go between images, the sky is sort of a telltale sign that you have changed the editing. And if your skies don't match, like this sky is white because it's backlit, but this sky over here is a nice blue, and when I come back to this sky, it might be moderately different. A little difference okay because the sun's in a different position, but if it's so different that one sky looks really cranked and dark blue and contrasty, then it's not going to match this other sky, which is, you know, this one's not there yet, but a proper aqua color like sky could be. If you look at the difference between those, you can see that this one is just super contrasty and not what we want. So I can double click on this dehaze slider. That'll bring it back down to 0. And then I can just tip it back in until I start to see some contrast and saturation come back into the buildings there. And that's all we're looking for. This is our leasing center. And for some reason, the doors in Texas all seem to face north, particularly on our leasing centers. But let me hit auto on this. Facing north means that the sun is always going to be behind the building, and this entry is going to be in shadow. So I'm going to, I hit auto already. I'm going to compress these. I'll bring up those midtones a little bit, and I'll pull out shadows here. If I go all the way, it starts to get washed out. We can either bring up that dehaze just a little to bring some color back into like the bricks in the doorway. But we want to be able to see in here. We need some detail in this area. Here we've got our pool. Pools usually come out pretty good with just auto. Pull out those shadows, drop the highlights a little, bring up the midtones, and I'd call that good. So once you get used to doing this, those kinds of settings can go pretty quickly, and you don't really have to mess with anything else. I'm just playing around with the white balance here. We're going to talk more about white balance later. Hit auto, and I don't generally have to worry about white balance too much on the exterior photos, but once we get to the interiors, you will see, if you haven't noticed already, that the interior photos can be all over the place. They might look yellow. Why is my auto button not coming up for this guy? Oh, I already hit it. That's why, because we were playing with this earlier. See, you get me all out of order. Those chairs are so yellow. That's really strange. I could come down here to the yellow slider and just dial that back a little bit, maybe. I don't like how bright those are. But see, it's affecting everything. It's affecting the grass. It's affecting the trees. So I don't want to do that either. Take those back to 0. I want everything to look natural. I don't want it to be oversaturated. Pull those shadows out. That looks pretty good. Hit auto. Pull those shadows up. Bring up the midtones. And when I get my midtones where I want them, there's still a lot of dark areas back in here. So I might grab that shadow slider and just pull that out to where I can start to see the color of the building. Hit auto, pull up the blacks. That looks pretty good. And then when we get to the end, we are going to compare all of these together in the library module. And this is where you'll really be able to see like the differences in the sky. And when we get to the interiors, you'll see that all of the interiors are a different white balance. So we're going to, we have exactly 30 images. What do you know? We're going to compare the images in this library module to make sure that everything is sort of on an even keel. Hit auto, pull that up. I'll bring up the midtones. Same. So there's a lot of redundancy to this, but redundancy is good because from redundancy comes consistency, and you want consistency in all of your images. Hit auto. I thought this was a nice little trail made out of white stone here. Kind of cool looking. Pull some shadows out. And this trail leads to the dog park, which is right here. Hit auto. Bring those brights down. Maybe bring the highlights down all the way because that building is so bright. And that should drop some of that. Pull the shadows over here. Now, I've got strong shadows on this side that's not letting me really see the right side of the image, and I've got my shadows almost all the way out over here. In fact, if I come all the way out with it, all of this gets washed out. So I'm going to bring that back down to where I have the detail back in here. But then I'm going to come up here to this little circle looking thing under my histograms, and this is where my masks are at. I'm going to grab a mask. This is called a linear gradient mask. Each of these masks does something a little bit different. The linear gradient you can pull from the edge and bring in. I want the darkest part of this mask to be over where those shadows are, and then it feathers off as it comes this way, and then I can grab the shadow slider here and pull out extra shadows on that side, and that helps balance out the image. Turn off that mask, and you can see backslash before and after, and it really brought the detail back out in this area. Good with that. Auto, pull this up, bring up some midtones. Good with that. Auto, this is the fitness center. Has the same issue as that leasing center had. The door is north facing, so everything is in shadow. If I bring the door up into proper exposure, then everything else gets washed out. So I got to bring the shadows back in so I can see all the detail around here, then try and pull shadows out of here. Now in this case, I couldn't use that linear mask because the edges are basically the same, but all of the shadow is in this center area. So I am going to drop that exposure a little bit more, grab a different mask, and this is a radial gradient mask. I can draw this mask out across the center where the majority of these shadows are, and then when I pull shadows out of there, it just brings that detail in to this area. If it's a little too much, like I said before, we can grab that dehaze slider and just kind of add contrast back to everything and balance it out. Balance is the key. I'm going to hit auto here. I feel like I didn't hit vertical on this. It says vertical. I like the original better. I like it without the vertical on it. All right, drop. There's not too many highlights in here. Pull up the shadows, or the blacks, sorry. Pull out the shadows. And that already works pretty good. I don't like to crop into my images too much if I don't have to, because then you lose pixels, and when you lose pixels, you lose detail. That's why we like higher pixel cameras. Drop those highlights, bring up the midtones, pull out the shadows. There you go, that looks good. And we're almost to the interiors here. So, whoops, I didn't hit auto first. Auto gets me to a base point that the computer thinks is right, but almost never is, and then we have to tweak it. It just gives us a starting point to work with. All right, this is the laundry. Hit auto. Now for this, I want to know that my white point is correct, but the machines are white, but the ceiling and the walls and everything else is brown. If I use my white balance tool, this little eyedropper here, and click on the machines, it didn't change much. It looks pretty good. They still look blue to me, and the rest of this is brown, so we don't really know what the natural color of these walls are. And of course, these old lights look yellow. So this is what happens when we get to our interiors, is that the white balance is often not correct. So if it's a little too blue, I can grab my slider over here, and I'm going to watch the histogram at the same time, and I just want to move it one way or another. To the white is usually warmer, to the right is warmer, and to the left is colder, And by warmer, we mean yellow, and by colder, we mean blue. But if you watch that histogram, you'll see all of the colors sort of come together at a certain point. And that is what makes white, because the colors are additive. So when you have blue, green, and red all together at the same place, that's what's going to create the white color in your image. So where most of those are is usually the proper white point, and then you have a tint here. If I go all the way left, you see it goes green. If I go all the way right, you see it goes magenta. You need to find the right spot for that as well. You can watch the histogram, but also watch the color in the frame, because as soon as I go left, it starts to go green. And as soon as I go too far right, it starts to go magenta. So right in there is a very precarious balance where it's in between magenta and green, and that's where your proper tint is. So you set the temperature first, set the tint second. I always do the white dropper. It's kind of like the auto for the white point. Do the eyedropper first. On something that's white in the area, nothing is white. You can't choose it off the light because that's too bright. Cannot set the white balance here. Click a neutral tone. This silver might work pretty good. Really what it wants is 50% gray, or even 18% gray, but between 18 and 50%, the gray has a tendency to just reflect the off colors. But you see when I clicked on this, my greens are too high, my blues are too low. So I'm going to grab that temperature slider, and I'm going to try going to the right first. Everything's getting further apart. And I knew that would happen because the blues were too low. If I want to add more blue, I want to go to the left. So I'm going to take this back to the left. And you'll see that all those little peaks and valleys start to line up. And again, with the green and magenta, see how that green starts getting too powerful. And then the magenta starts to come in right there. And this is just the midpoint, the balancing act between those two. It's not a beautiful photo. It just shows that they have a mailroom here. I might not even use that photo in the end. This was my two images, one with the guy coming through the door and one with the door closed. So I don't need both of them. I'm going to right click on this image. I'm going to click remove photo. And when I remove that photo, that's the HDR image, it unstacks my three bracketed images. So I'm going to grab those, one, shift, hold the third one down, click, and remove photos. Take all three of those out. I don't need those anymore. And now I have this photo. I'm going to hit Command A again so that I'm back where I need to be. So we'll hit Auto. And I'm going to take my eyedropper tool. I put this little thing in the picture because this should be a proper white card, because we don't know what color all of these walls are. Now you would think that this ceiling is all one color, but if you look at it, it's really bright over here. It's really dark over here. This is a different color cast all the way across. So I put something in here that I knew was proper white, and it usually, if I take that eyedropper tool and click on it, gives me a good neutral tone somewhere in between where these should be. But just like the auto button, it's not perfect, and you can see my peaks and valleys are off a little bit here. So I'm going to grab that temperature slider. It looks like we need to bring in some more blue, line those up, and to me this looks like the green is a little too strong in my histogram. We'll see how it looks in here. I'll start going towards the right. And now it's starting to get magenta. I'll pull it back a little bit. I'm going to call that good. But now I got this thing in my picture that doesn't need to be there. So what am I going to do about that? I'm going to grab this little eraser tool, and we're going to use AI. So this is generative AI. I'm just going to draw around this thing and its shadow, because if you don't draw around the shadow, AI will place something there that it thinks made the shadow. So let's go ahead and draw this out. it's going to create a mask, and then I'll click remove, and it's gone. Do I like what it did here? I'm not sure. I've got 3 options, so I'm going to go through the variations and look at which one I like best. I think this looks more natural just because this edge gets really blurry on the tear in the seat over here. That one's really blurry, and this one looks natural. So I can close that, and I think that looks really good. If I wanted to get really granular about it, I could also just come to this healing tool or use generative AI again. Because of this gradient here, I'm going to go with the generative AI again. Let's use the healing tool first, just so you can see what it does. I'm going to grab my healing tool. I can make this bigger or smaller with the bracket keys. So right bracket makes it bigger, left bracket makes it smaller. And I'm just going to draw over this area right here where that tear is in the bench. And it's going to select something that it thinks matches, but this clearly doesn't match because it's all floor. So I can grab this piece and I can drag it somewhere that does actually match, and I can line up the edge of the bench right about there. But you can see it's got weird highlights because the colors and the gradients aren't the same here. The bench lined up really nice. If I turn off that little pencil, you can see I got the edge of the bench in there. Like it's not perfect. I'm not super happy with it. So I'm going to go where this Band-Aid is. I'm going to click on it again. I'm just going to hit the trash can to remove that. And I'm going to go back to generative AI. I'm going to let AI figure out how this should actually look if I wanted to take that tear out of the bench. It's analyzing it. I'll click remove. It's creating something new for me. I'll have 3 options. It looks like a brand new bench seat. Look at that. 1, 2, 3. I like 3. I like 2. I like 2 because it looks like it's more worn in leather like the rest of the benches. So there you go. We not only removed my little white card, but we fixed the bench while we were at it. All right, so we can go on to click auto. It kind of decides where everything should be. We're going to drag down those highlights again so they're not too bright. We're going to bring up the blacks. We are at a pretty good spot here for the exposure. It's kind of got like 2 peaks and valleys, so you have to decide, do you want this to be your highlight point, or do you want this to be where your exposure is set? I'm going somewhere in the middle. I usually like everything right about the top of the mids of the highlights, but if I bring this up there, that's obviously way overexposed. So I'm bringing it back down. I feel like that has a nice natural feel to it. Let's move on. We can do the same thing here. I don't know why this image turned out so blurry. It could be that one of the frames unfocused. This one looks blurry too. That one's really bad. And this one came out blurry also, which to have 3 in a row is just unheard of. One thing I can do is I can make sure I'm on just this image. I'm going to unstack. It's possible that one of the 3 frames was not in focus, or it could be all 3 of the frames. This looks like all 3 frames to me were not in focus. Let's try this one. Stacking, unstack. Those are definitely not in focus. And stacking, unstack. 1, 2, 3. Well, if we had one frame that had come out, we could probably pull enough out of it, bringing down the highlights, bringing out the shadows, that we could save the image. But in this case, we cannot save these images, which is a problem because there's only one model for this apartment complex and it's very small, so we need a representative of the kitchen, we need a representative of the living room. That's two very important images that we now don't have. The only way to fix that is to go back to the apartments. But let's carry on with this image for now. I'm just gonna click that highlight, that white card, so you can see how all my whites come in. I am going to erase that little guy and just remove it. And turn my mask off. Whoops. I mean, it's bright, so I'm going to bring that down. I still have a lot of highlights in here, and you can see my whites are all the way down, so I can grab that highlight slider and just drop it off. And the reason for that is this light here, and it's reflecting over here. I don't even know where my focus point was on this. I'm so messed up about that now that it's frustrating me. But that would be my picked image. I'm just going to grab these other three and remove those photos. Now that it's stacked, I don't need them anymore. This one's not going to come in at all. It's really out of focus. And there's two of them. Like there's one there, there's one there. So I took the same image twice, and they're both out of focus. That's really frustrating. I mean, this one's really out of focus. That almost never happens. And if it does happen, I usually catch it in camera. So I can grab all of these. It's possible AI could fix this, maybe. Let's see what AI does with it. Now, see, that's the enhanced view. And it's not giving me super resolution. Let's cancel this. Let's go over to this one that's not stacked. And let's try it with this. I want to give me super resolution. It's not going to bring it back in focus anyway. That's kind of the point. Yeah. It's not doing what I need. This is something new. So this is to add blur to your image, but we want We want to remove blur, and I just don't think that's going to happen. All right, I'm stopping the video.